The air in the grand amphitheater was perfectly still. It was always this way, a gentle gift from the life support systems of the Galactic Union's Diplomatic Academy. Instructor June, a Lorvathian, moved with a serene grace at the center of the huge, circular stage. His long fingers traced patterns in the air, pulling up holograms that shimmered like soap bubbles. Civilizational stability. His voice was soft but carried to every seat. Is the bedrock upon which lasting peace is built. It is the product of a gentle world. A world that does not fight its children. The holograms displayed images of serene landscapes from famous core worlds. Rolling plains under twin pink suns, calm glassy seas, forests of slow-growing crystal. The 100 or so trainees in the audience, representing a dozen species, watched with respectful attention. In the very back row, slightly apart from the main clusters, sat Jihyun. Her posture was straight but not stiff, her dark eyes fixed on June. Next to her, her friend Taesuk was trying, and failing, to hide a yawn. He quickly covered it with a hand when a Kellery trainee in front of them glanced back, her antennae twitching. Consider the metrics, June continued. Complex graph appeared. Planetary axial tilt variance below 5 degrees. Minimal seismic activity. A balanced, gentle food chain. These factors allow a species to direct its energy away from mere survival. Away from constant fear. They can focus on art, on philosophy, on deep-time diplomacy. He paused, letting the ideal sink in. Now, historical records speak of other kinds of worlds. Theoretical constructs, really. Worlds of violent extremes. Cataclysmic weather. Relentless gravity. Predation so pervasive it would shape a psyche into something hardened, paranoid. These are the so-called death worlds. A murmur, a mix of fascination and discomfort, rippled through the amphitheater. The concept was a ghost story for advanced civilizations. The species supposedly born from such environments, June said, a note of academic sadness in his tone, would be legends of aggression. Their biology would be a patchwork of brutal defenses. Their minds, wired for constant threat assessment, would be incapable of the trust that galactic society requires. Thankfully, if they ever existed, they are gone. Eaten by their own harsh realities. They serve as a lesson. A stable cradle creates a stable mind. Jihyun's expression did not change. She simply listened. Taesuk, however, shifted in his seat. He leaned over and whispered, so low only she could hear. My stable cradle had a hurricane that moved our house 50 meters when I was 7. Does that count? A faint, almost invisible smile touched Jihyun's lips. She gave a tiny shake of her head, her eyes still on June. The lecture moved on to case studies of successful, stable civilizations. Jihyun took notes on her data slate, her movements efficient. She was aware of the occasional glance sent her way. The humans were still a novelty. They were polite, they learned quickly, but they were quiet. Their planet, Earth, was listed in the database as dynamically active, with a high biodiversity quotient. It was a polite way of saying it was interesting, but not to be taken seriously as a model for anything. When the lecture ended, the trainees flowed out into the wide, softly lit corridors of the Academy station. The air smelled faintly of ozone and alien perfumes. Jihyun and Taesuk fell into step, heading for the main dining hall. The hall was a vibrant chaos of shapes, colors, and gentle sounds. They found a table with some of their usual group. Hannah, the Kellery, was already there, her delicate hands arranging a plate of nutrient gels. Min-Su, a broad-shouldered Tarkesian, was slowly consuming a brick of mineral substrate. So, Hannah began, her voice a friendly chirp. Her large, compound eyes reflected the room's light. The Deathworld lecture, such a frightening idea. I am glad it is just theory. Can you imagine living in constant fear? Taesuk shrugged, digging into a reconstituted meat and rice bowl from the human dispenser. It's not so much constant fear as constant checking. Look both ways before you cross the street. Check the weather forecast. Don't pet the fuzzy animal with too many teeth. Hannah and Minsu made sounds of polite disbelief. "You speak as if from experience," Minsu said, his voice a low rumble like grinding stones. "From stories," Taesuk clarified with a grin. "Old stories." Jihyun sat quietly, picking at her own food, a soup with noodles. It was bland but edible. "My grandmother," Taesuk continued, warming to his tale. "She lived by a big ocean. Every year there was a season of huge spinning storms. Typhoons, we called them. The sky would go green. The wind would scream like it wanted to tear the world apart. Everyone would board up their windows and hide in the strongest part of the house." Hannah had stopped eating, her antennae quivering with horrified fascination. "How terrible! What was the survival rate?" Taesuk blinked. "Oh, most people were fine. You just prepared. Afterwards, you'd go out and clean up, help your neighbors. It was just a thing that happened." The table was silent for a moment. Then Hannah let out a tinkling laugh. "You are a wonderful storyteller, Taesuk, spinning storms that tear the world, and you just clean up afterwards. You humans have such vivid imaginations. It is like the epic myths we tell our larvae." Minsu nodded slowly, a gesture that meant he too thought it was an entertaining fiction. The idea that such conditions could be a normal, survivable part of life for a sentient species was absurd. It belonged in legend, not in a dining hall. Taesuk just smiled and shrugged again. Catching Jihyun's eye, she finally looked up from her soup. Her face was calm, but in her eyes, Taesuk saw a familiar, quiet depth. It was the look of someone who knew the exact weight of a story's truth. She didn't argue. She didn't correct them. She simply took another sip of her bland, safe, station-grown soup, sitting silently in the back row of the galaxy. The medical wing was the quietest place on the Academy station. The lighting was soft and blue, and a faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air. It was time for the first-year physiological compatibility evaluation, a routine but mandatory test for all new trainees. Jihyun waited in line with her group. The line moved slowly. One by one, each trainee stepped onto a white platform. A friendly but silent medical droid would extend a thin arm. A small injector would press against their skin, administering a standard cocktail. It was a mix of harmless but identifiable compounds, common proteins from various station-approved foods, mild environmental allergens, and neutral neuromarkers. The point was to map how a new species body reacted to these basic galactic substances. Ahead of her, Hannah stepped onto the platform. The injector touched her chitinous forearm. A screen above the platform displayed a gentle, wavy green line. A soft chime sounded. "Calorie physiology nominal. No adverse reactions," a computerized voice announced. Hannah stepped down, her antennae waving in relief. Minsu was next. The injector had to use a slightly stronger pulse to penetrate his mineral-rich skin. The screen showed a flat blue line. "Tarkesian physiology nominal. No detectable reaction." He nodded and moved away. Taesuk went before Jihyun. He gave her a quick grin and stepped up. The injector hissed. The screen showed the green line spike briefly into yellow, then settle back to green. Human physiology variant 1. Mild histamine response to compound gamma-7. Benign. Tolerance logged. Taesuk rubbed his arm and joined the others. "Felt like a mosquito bite," he whispered to Jihyun. Then it was Jihyun's turn. She stepped onto the clean, white surface. The medical droid swiveled its sensor head towards her. "Please present forearm for standard biocompatibility scan and injection," it intoned. Jihyun rolled up the sleeve of her gray trainee uniform and held out her arm. The droid's light passed over her skin. The injector pressed against her. There was a quiet hiss. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen above the platform lit up not with a simple line, but with a flashing storm of colors. The green line spiked violently into red, then fragmented into a dozen different spectral readings. Warning symbols flashed. Unexpected metabolic activity. Foreign compound breakdown detected. Enzymatic neutralization in progress. A low alarm beeped, then cut off as the system recalibrated. The chaotic lines on the screen rapidly smoothed out. They didn't return to a calm green, however. They settled into a flat, steady white line, a reading so neutral it was rarely seen. The medical droid was silent for a full 3 seconds, its processors whirring. Anomaly detected, it stated. Subject exhibits comprehensive biochemical resistance matrix. Administered compounds, neutralized. Allergenic proteins, denatured. Neuromarkers, metabolized. Zero adverse reaction. Physiological profile, atypical. The group of trainees waiting nearby had gone completely still. Hannah's antennae were stiff with surprise. Min-Soo watched the screen, his rocky brow furrowed. Tae-Suk just crossed his arms, a knowing look on his face. Instructor Jun, who was observing the tests from the side, glided over. His elegant features showed polite concern. A malfunction? He asked the droid, his voice calm. Scan indicates no malfunction. Instructor, the droid replied. The human trainees' biological systems identified all foreign compounds as potential threats and deployed targeted counteragents. Efficiency, 100%. June looked from the droid to Ji-Hyen, who had lowered her arm and was calmly rolling her sleeve back down. 100%? He echoed. That is statistically remarkable. Most species have at least one mild sensitivity. It shows a very robust immune system. Trainee Ji-Hyen. Ji-Hyen met his gaze and gave a small, respectful nod. It is standard, instructor, she said simply. Standard? Hannah chirped from the sidelines, unable to contain her curiosity. You mean all humans do that? Your body attacks everything you are given. It does not attack, Ji-Hyen corrected gently, stepping off the platform. It examines. If the compound is not recognized as beneficial, it is broken down. It is a precaution. Min-Soo rumbled. A precaution against what? Against the unknown, Ji-Hyen said. On a world with millions of plant species, fungi and microbes, most of which are not edible or are actively hostile, it is a useful precaution. You learn to have good filters. June was studying the data scrolling on the droid's side panel. The list of neutralized compounds was long. He saw the codes for things that would give a Lorvathian a mild rash, or make a Kellery sneeze for an hour. All of them were logged as nullified. It seems your filters are exceptionally thorough, June said. He was a scientist at heart. The data was fascinating, but he framed it within his existing understanding. A fascinating adaptation. Perhaps your homeworld has a more diverse microecology than our records show. A robust immune response is, of course, a positive trait. He was trying to fit this square fact into the round hole of galactic normalcy. He filed it in his mind as a curious outlier, a biological novelty. As they left the medical wing, the others buzzed with quiet talk about the event. Tae-Suk bumped Ji-Hyen's shoulder with his own. Show off, he whispered, smiling. Ji-Hyen allowed herself a small smile in return. I did nothing. It was an automatic function. Yeah, but your automatic functions give medical droids a nervous breakdown, he chuckled. Ahead of them, Hannah was speaking to Min-Soo. It must be so exhausting, she said, her voice full of sympathetic wonder. For her body to be on such high alert all the time, seeing danger in every little thing. It must be like living in a state of quiet panic. Ji-Hyen heard the comment. She did not turn or correct it. The idea that her body's normal state was one of panic was so incorrect she didn't know where to begin. It wasn't panic. It was readiness. It was the difference between standing on solid ground and standing on a shifting, active surface. You didn't tremble. You just learned how to balance. She walked on, her pace even, her breathing calm. The test had shown them a single thread of the tapestry that was Earth's legacy. They had seen the thread, but they still thought it was just a piece of stray string, not part of a larger, much stronger picture. The Academy's botanical garden was not a garden for food, but for knowledge. It was a huge, multi-level space where plants from dozens of worlds grew under carefully controlled conditions. Each sector had its own light, atmosphere, and gravity. Trainees often had duty shifts here to learn respect for other biospheres. Ji-Hyen's group was assigned to the mid-tier sectors. Instructor June led them, explaining the delicate balance of each environment. They passed through a low-gravity zone where fluffy, spore-filled floatweeds drifted like silent clouds. Hannah seemed most at home here, her light steps almost bouncing. They entered the next sector. A sign glowed softly, Terran Standard Horticultural Study. The gravity here was set to 1.2 galactic standard, which the system labeled as elevated for robust flora. To Ji-Hyen and Tae-suk, it felt like a pleasant, familiar weight. To the others, it was a noticeable heaviness. Min-soo moved with a slow, deliberate strength. Hannah's movements became careful, her lightness a disadvantage here. This section, June said, gesturing to the dense, green vegetation, holds plants from the human homeworld, Earth. Notice the thick stems, the deep-root simulations, an adaptation to their consistent, though somewhat strong, gravity. Ji-Hyen looked at a simulated oak sapling. It was small, but it looked correct. The air even smelled faintly of damp soil and green things. It was a tiny piece of home, and she felt a calm feeling settle over her. A soft, chiming alarm echoed from the sector next door, a delicate area holding flora from the Glimmer homeworld, a place of very low gravity. June's head tilted. A minor atmospheric alert. Wait here, please. He glided quickly towards the connecting door, which hissed shut behind him. The trainees stood among the earth plants. Tae-suk reached out and touched a broad leaf. Tough, he commented. Suddenly, the station lights flickered. A deep, shuddering thump vibrated through the floor. It was the sound of a power surge diverting. Emergency lights bathed everything in a pale blue. A much louder, urgent alarm blared from the direction June had gone. A voice, tight with panic, came over the garden's comms. Containment failure in Sector 7 Glimmer. Gravity regulator spiking. Safety seals are active, but we have 2 Glimmerling visitors trapped inside. Emergency teams, respond. On the main viewing screen on the wall, a live feed from the Glimmer sector appeared. The scene was terrible. The gravity generator, damaged by the surge, was malfunctioning. The readout showed the numbers climbing past safe limits. 1.5 G, 2.0 G, 2.3 G. In the center of the beautiful crystal-flowered garden, 2 Glimmerlings lay. They were small, delicate beings, like living sculptures of light and thin, graceful limbs. Under the crushing, unintended gravity, they could not move. Their forms were starting to wilt, to compress. They were in silent distress. Through the thick observation window, they could see Instructor June. He was at the sealed emergency door, his hands pressed against it. He was shouting instructions to someone, but his body was already straining. Lorvathians were from a 0.7 G world. Even at the door, where the gravity was less, he looked pained. To enter the full force of the chamber would be impossible for him. The emergency suits, Hannah cried, pointing to a wall panel. Min-soo was already there. He punched the release. The panel opened to reveal 4 heavy, servo-assisted suits designed to let maintenance workers fix problems in high-G environments. They were bulky and complex. It will take 5 minutes to get into these. They do not have 5 minutes. Min-soo rumbled, his voice tense. On screen, the gravity ticked to 2.5 G. Everyone was talking at once, frozen by the horror of the slow-motion disaster. Then, a movement. Ji-Hyen was walking, not towards the suits, but towards the sealed secondary maintenance hatch on their side of the Earth sector. It was a direct, heavy-duty airlock leading into the Glimmer Garden for moving large equipment. Ji-Hyen, no, Tae-suk said, but it was not a shout of panic. It was a statement of understanding. She didn't run. Her walk was fast, purposeful. She reached the hatch. Next to it was a manual override wheel, large and locked with a safety bolt. The sign said, "For maintenance drone use only, 500 kilograms force minimum to engage." Ji-Hyen grabbed the wheel. She braced one foot against the wall. Her knuckles turned white. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, metallic groan of protest, the wheel began to turn. The safety bolt snapped with a sharp ping. She spun the wheel once, twice. A green light flashed. The heavy door hissed, then slid open. A wall of dense, heavy air seemed to rush out. Inside the glimmer garden, the world was wrong. The beautiful crystal flowers were bent to the ground. The air itself felt thick as water. Ji-Hyen stepped across the threshold. The increased gravity hit her. On the view screen, her biosigns flickered to life in a corner. Her heart rate jumped, but then settled into a strong, rapid rhythm. Her breathing deepened. She did not crumple. She did not stagger. She leaned forward slightly, as if walking into a powerful wind, and took her first step. Then another. Her steps were not normal. They were heavy, deliberate thumps. Each foot was placed with care, her body moving with a powerful, rolling gait. It was the walk of someone crossing a mountain slope or wading through a surging river. It was hard, but it was a kind of hard she understood. The watching trainees were silent, mouths agape. Minsu stared, his mineral face unreadable. Hannah had both hands over her mouth. On the other side of the main window, Instructor Jun saw her. His eyes widened in disbelief. Ji-Hyen moved through the distorted garden. Took time. Each step was work. She reached the two glimmerlings. She did not try to lift them quickly. Instead, she knelt. A slow, controlled collapse, and gently slid her arms under their fragile forms. One in the crook of each arm. She held them close to her body, shielding them. Then she began the walk back. It was slower now, carrying the precious load. Her biosigns stayed steady, high, but stable, a controlled burn of energy. Her face was calm, set in concentration. Sweat gleamed on her forehead, but her arms did not shake. She reached the hatch, stepped through, and immediately hit the close switch. The door hissed shut. The moment it sealed, the terrible weight lifted. The normal 1.2 G of the Earth sector felt almost like floating. She gently lowered the two glimmerlings to the soft turf of the simulated Earthgrass. They stirred, their faint inner light pulsing weakly but steadily. They were alive. Ji-Hyen took a deep, long breath, then let it out slowly. She wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her heart rate was already beginning to slow on the monitor. The emergency team arrived then, bursting in with their powered suits. They stopped, confused. The crisis was over. Instructor Jun came through the main door, his face pale. He looked from the safe glimmerlings to Ji-Hyen, who was now just standing quietly, her hands at her sides. Ji-Hyen, he began, but words failed him. He had seen the data, he had heard the stories. But seeing a young trainee walk into a crushing 2.5 G as if it were a stiff breeze because someone needed help was different. It was not theory. It was not a robust immune system. It was a fact written in motion, in strength, in silent, unhesitating action. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Not as a curious specimen, but as a person who had just done the impossible because it was necessary. The legend of the Deathworld was no longer a story in a book. It was standing before him, breathing calmly, having just saved 2 lives without a single word. The silence that followed Ji-Hyen in the corridors was different now. Before, it had been the silence of being overlooked. Now, it was the silence of being watched. People didn't stare openly, but she felt their eyes. A quick glance, a whispered comment when she passed. The story of the Gravity Garden had spread. It was already being called the Walk. Ji-Hyen did not change. She still sat in the back. She still spoke only when asked a direct question. She still ate her bland soup with quiet focus. But the space around her had changed. Taesuk joked that she had become a quiet celebrity. But even his jokes were softer, touched with a new kind of pride. A few days later, the trainees filed into a different classroom for a required seminar, Xenobiology and Tactical Field Medicine. The instructor was a no-nonsense Vitharian, a species with thick, leathery skin. The topic was pain. Pain, the instructor stated, her voice like grinding gravel, is a signal, tells you something is wrong. For most advanced species, the nervous system has a built-in safety. When damage reaches a certain level, the system overloads. It shuts down conscious feeling to preserve the mind. You go into shock. This is a protective measure. Holograms showed simplified diagrams of different alien nervous systems, all with a clear red line marking the neural shutoff point. It is why, the instructor continued, in a true battlefield crisis you treat the most severely wounded last. Their own biology has already put them in a protective state. They are not feeling the pain. You focus on those who are still conscious, still screaming. They are closer to the edge. The room was somber. It was a dark, practical lesson. Hannah raised a delicate hand. Instructor, for species with this shutoff, does the pain return when they wake up? Often, yes. But by then, hopefully, they are in a medical pod. The lesson moved to demonstrations of pain-suppressing field injectors. Ji-hyun listened, her head tilted slightly. She was comparing the information to what she knew. It did not quite match. When the lecture part ended, there was a short break. Hannah turned in her seat to look at Ji-hyun. Her large eyes were curious, not unkind. Ji-hyun, Hannah began, her voice respectful. Your people. Do you have such a system? A shut-off point. All the nearby conversations died. Min-soo turned his heavy head. Even Instructor June, who was observing from the side of the room, paused to listen. Ji-hyun considered the question. She saw Tae-suk give her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It is not the same, Ji-hyun said, her voice clear in the quiet room. We do not have a set point where the signal stops. We have a volume control. The signal always comes through, but the mind can choose to turn down the volume, to focus past it. We can function with significant damage if the situation requires it. A confused murmur went through the class. The Vitharian instructor frowned. That sounds like a description of shock, but conscious. A paradox. It is not a paradox, Ji-hyun said. It is a choice. The body says, stop, you are hurt. The mind can say, not yet. Hannah looked fascinated and horrified. But why? What is the evolutionary reason for such suffering? Ji-hyun met her gaze. On a world with many predators, a broken leg does not mean you are safe. The predator does not care that you are in pain. It only cares that you have stopped moving. To stop moving is to die. So, you learn to move anyway. The room was utterly silent. The concept was alien in the deepest sense. Pain was not a thing to be overcome. It was a thing to be escaped through unconsciousness. The idea of enduring it by will alone was terrifying. The Vitharian instructor seemed intrigued despite herself. This is a theoretical model? Or can it be demonstrated? Ji-hyun paused. She looked at the instructor, then at the expectant faces. She knew a crossroads when she saw one. She could shrug and say it was just theory. Or she could show them. May I use the pressure pain stimulator? Ji-hyun asked, pointing to a standard medical device on a demonstration table. It was a tool for testing nerve function, a small pad that could create a precise, localized pressure that the brain would interpret as sharp pain. The instructor nodded, curious. Ji-hyun walked to the front. The device was calibrated for multiple species. She scrolled past the settings for Lorvathians and Kellery, past the Tarkesian settings. She found the human calibration. There was a scale from 1 to 10. She set it to 8. The screen displayed a warning. Caution. High neural discomfort. Not for prolonged exposure. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing her forearm. Without ceremony, she placed the pad against her skin and activated it. A soft hum filled the room. On the main display, a graph sprang to life. It was a live feed of Ji-hyun's neurological response. A jagged, violent red line spiked upwards again and again. The machine was shouting pain in the clear language of electrical signals. The reading was well into the zone marked acute discomfort. Every trainee winced. Hannah looked away, then forced herself to look back. Min-soo's hands were clenched. Tae-suk watched his friend, his own jaw tight. Ji-hyun's body reacted. Her breath hitched once. A flush of red spread up her neck. A muscle in her jaw twitched. But she did not cry out. She did not pull her arm away. She held it steady. She began to speak, her voice tight but perfectly clear. The signal is real. You can see it. My body is reporting major damage. But the situation is not real. There is no wound. So the mind disagrees. She took a controlled breath. It assesses the context. No blood. No structural damage. Therefore, the signal, while loud, is a false alarm. It can be compartmentalized. She continued to hold the device in place. The red line on the graph did not lessen. But her voice grew steadier. In a real situation, the context would be different. The mind would accept the signal as true. But the goal would not be to shut it off. The goal would be to accomplish the task despite it. To get to safety. To help another. To finish the fight. Then you can feel the pain. 30 seconds passed. The machine beeped a warning about overexposure. Ji-Hyen deactivated it. The hum stopped. The red line on the graph fell to 0. She lowered her arm. A bright red, angry circle marked her skin where the stimulator had been. She did not rub it. She simply rolled her sleeve back down. Her breathing was slightly faster than normal, but already slowing. A sheen of sweat was on her upper lip. She looked at the instructor. That is the mechanism. It is not better. It is just different. It was necessary for our context. The Vitharian instructor was silent for a long moment, studying the graph, then Ji-Hyen's face. Fascinating, she finally said. And it was not a polite word. It was a scientific one. A conscious override of base survival programming. I have never seen such a clear neurological display of will. The class was too stunned to murmur. They had just seen a person look at a storm of pain signals on a screen, signals their own bodies would have used to knock them unconscious, and simply talk through it. Hannah was staring, her earlier horror replaced by a dawning, profound awe. Min-Soo gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of deep respect from his kind. Instructor June did not speak. He remembered the garden. He remembered the calm, heavy steps. He understood now that it wasn't just her muscles that had walked into that gravity. It was this terrifying, incredible ability to tell her own body, not yet. The legend was not just about bone density or immune systems. It was about the mind that commanded them. He looked at the human trainee, and for the first time he felt not curiosity, but something close to reverence. Instructor June's private office was a place of quiet thought. Soft light emanated from the walls, and holographic models of peaceful stellar systems rotated slowly in the air. He usually found the room calming. Tonight it felt like the walls were closing in. He sat at his desk, the soft glow of his data screen the only harsh light in the room. On it was the official Galactic Union file for the planet catalogued as Sol 3, Earth. He had read the summary a dozen times before. It was a standard entry: atmospheric nitrogen-oxygen blend, hydrosphere-dominated, carbon-based biosphere. The notes added notable geological and meteorological activity and high biodiversity. The tone was dry, academic. It made Earth sound interesting, like a lively but ultimately minor exhibit in a museum. But that was the summary. Now he was deep in the raw data. His long fingers moved through the air, pulling up subfiles. He opened the planetary climate logs. He saw not just graphs of seasons, but maps of continent-sized pressure systems colliding. He saw records of wind speeds that made his own world's gentle breezes seem like nothing. He saw the term hypercane and the attached energy readings. He thought of Taesuk's story about typhoons, told as a joke in the mess hall. He opened the geological survey. The seismic activity charts were not the smooth, near-flat lines of a stable world. They were forests of jagged peaks. Tectonic plate boundaries, active and numerous. The report listed thousands of significant seismic events per standard cycle. He read about the Ring of Fire. The name was not scientific, but it was apartment. It sounded like a warning. He pulled up the atmospheric analysis. The oxygen percentage was higher than he'd realized. It was an energetic, aggressive atmosphere that accelerated fire and metabolism. Then he saw the list of trace elements and common environmental toxins: arsenic, mercury, radioactive isotopes, all present in background levels the report called within tolerable limits for native life. Tolerable. He thought of Ji-hyen's medical scan. The comprehensive biochemical resistance matrix. Her body didn't just tolerate these things. It expected them. He opened the ecological survey. The section on macropredators was not a short list of specialized hunters. It was extensive. It described pack hunters with cooperative tactics, solitary ambush predators with immense strength, aquatic hunters of staggering size. The notes described evolutionary arms races between predator and prey that had lasted for millions of years. It was a world where life was under constant, inventive pressure. Finally, he pulled up the Academy's own files. He split the screen. On one side, he placed the raw data from Earth. On the other, he placed the incident reports. He lined up the gravity reading from the Glimmer Garden 2.5 G with Earth's standard gravity of 1 G. Then he found the note, Earth's gravitational force, while within standard parameters, is considered high for a biosphere of such volatility and complexity. The combination is unusual. Unusual. Ji-hyen had walked in 2.5 times her home gravity as if it were a heavy burden, not an impossible one. He pulled the neuroscan from the pain stimulator demonstration. The violent red lines. He cross-referenced it with the psychological profiles in the Earth file, the notes on risk assessment and group cooperation under threat. A strong, conscious override of distress signals is theorized to be linked to cooperative survival in high-risk environments. Last, he brought up the medical report from the compatibility test. The list of neutralized compounds. He searched the Earth environmental data. He found matches for most of them. Naturally occurring plant alkaloids, common microbial byproducts, industrial pollutants from their pre-FTL era. Her body had seen them all before or things very much like them. June leaned back in his chair. The soft light of the holographic stars played over his pale, troubled face. He had been a teacher for decades. He believed in order, in the gentle progression of knowledge. The universe, in his view, rewarded stability. The data on his screen did not describe stability. It described a world in a state of beautiful, terrible chaos. A world of fire and ice, of shaking earth and raging skies. A world where the air could poison you, the land could shake you apart, and the very creatures alongside you were locked in a billion-year war of eat or be eaten. And from this world came Ji-hyen. Not a myth, not a legend. A young woman who drank soup quietly in his mess hall. Her very existence was a product of every single line of data on the screen. Her bones were dense because the gravity and the predators demanded it. Her blood was a fortress because the microbes waged constant war. Her mind could compartmentalize agony because to stop was to die. He had called her people's story a ghost story. He had been wrong. It was not a ghost story. It was an epic. A survival epic written in flesh and blood and willpower, on a page of perpetual storm. He keyed his calm trainee Ji-hyen. Please report to my office. She arrived a short time later, dressed in her simple gray trainee uniform. She stood at ease before his desk. Instructor June. Please sit, he said. His voice quieter than usual. She sat. He looked at her, really looked. He saw no arrogance, no pride. Just that same steady patience. Your file, he began, gesturing to the screen. Your world's file. I have been reviewing them. Together. Ji-hyen said nothing. She waited. The gravity, the toxins, the seismic activity, the everything. He paused, searching for words. It is all true, not exaggeration, not stories. Ji-hyen nodded slowly. Yes, instructor. It is all true. The data is accurate. But how? He trailed off, then tried again. How do you not live in constant fear? She considered the question. We do not fear the ground for being hard. We do not fear the rain for being wet. It is simply the nature of things. You learn the rules. You watch the sky. You build strong shelters. You listen to the old warnings. You respect the world. Fear is for the unknown. We worked very hard to know our world. June absorbed this. To him, a world was a cradle. To her, it was a teacher. A harsh, unforgiving, but consistent teacher. And this ability to endure. to choose to continue despite injury. It is just another tool, she said softly, like a strong grip or fast legs. It is only for emergencies. The goal is always to avoid the emergency. But when it comes, you use every tool you have. He stared at the data, then back at her calm face. The connection was finally made. The myth was a person. The Deathworld was a home. The lessons he had taught about stability and peace were not wrong, but they were incomplete. There was another kind of strength, forged not in peace, but in an unending conversation with chaos. "Thank you, Trainee Jihyun," he said, his voice full of a new and solemn respect. "You have expanded my understanding. You are dismissed." She stood, gave a small bow, and left as quietly as she had entered. June sat in the silence of his office, the gentle holographic stars now seeming fragile. He had believed his civilization was at the pinnacle. Now he understood they had simply been living on the calm, sheltered shore. Humanity had learned to sail the perpetual storm, and they had not just survived. They had come to the academy. The final exam was called the Harmony Simulation. It took place in the main tactical deck, which had been transformed into the bridge of a large, multi-species transport ship, the SS Concorde. The trainees were not just being tested on knowledge, but on crisis diplomacy, quick thinking, and the ability to lead a group under pressure. They were divided into small crews. Jihyun found herself as part of a 5-person team. Instructor June was the silent overseer, watching from an elevated observation booth. Her crewmates were Hannah, Min-soo, Tae-suk, and a nervous Lorvathian trainee named Lyra. They were to work together to navigate a simulated emergency. The simulation began smoothly. The Concorde was damaged, losing power. Alerts flashed. Hannah, at the communications station, chirped out status reports in her efficient way. Min-soo, with his strength, manned the engineering console, rerouting power. Tae-suk and Lyra handled navigation and life support. Jihyun was stationed at environmental control and damage assessment. For the first 20 minutes, it was a complex but manageable puzzle. They worked together well. They argued politely, found compromises. Min-soo would need more power for shields, so Hannah would negotiate with Lyra to reduce non-essential lighting. It was exactly what the Academy trained them for. Then, the simulation threw its major problem. A deep, shuddering boom echoed through the simulated bridge. The lights dipped to a bloody red. 2 new, critical alerts screamed for attention simultaneously on the main screen. Alert! Primary reactor containment breach, Sector 4. Lethal radiation leak detected. Containment or evacuation required within 8 minutes. Alert! Micrometeoroid strike, Sector 9. Hull breach. Atmosphere venting rapidly. Seal or evacuate section within 5 minutes. A third, smaller alert flashed. Secondary repair crew unavailable. Simulated injury. Silence fell on the bridge. They had only one repair team. One problem was a slow, invisible poison. The other was a violent, sucking wound. Both were fatal. Hannah was the first to speak, her voice tight. "The radiation. My people are very susceptible. A leak of that type. We must contain it first." Min-soo studied the radiation readout. "The shielding in that sector is heavy. It will take time to move it. My people are more resistant to radiation than most, but not fully immune." It was a statement of fact, not a claim to the task. Lyra, the Lorvathian, wrung her hands. "The hull breach. If we lose pressure to that sector, it could destabilize the whole ship's integrity. The violence of the decompression. The sharp debris. It is too dangerous for anyone to approach." Tae-suk looked at the hull breach schematic, then at Jihyun. She was staring at the 2 flashing alerts, her eyes moving between the data streams. Her face was calm, but intensely focused. The argument began in earnest. Hannah insisted on the radiation leak, citing the greater long-term danger. Min-soo argued for the hull breach, citing immediate structural collapse. Lyra tried to calculate a half solution for both and found it impossible. The timer ticked down. For minutes until atmosphere was gone. 7 until radiation spread. The volume rose. Fear, real in its simulation, made their voices sharp. They were no longer a crew. They were representatives of their species' vulnerabilities, each advocating for the survival they understood best. Instructor June watched from above, his heart heavy. This was the test. Would they fracture? Would they fail? Ji-Hyen had been quiet, running numbers on her console. She looked at the radiation density, the rate of atmospheric loss, the schematics of the ship's internal layout. She compared them not to galactic standards but to the parameters she knew. Earth parameters. High UV radiation zones. Sudden depressurization incidents in mountain climbs. She saw a path. It was not a safe path. It was a path of calculated risk, of using the right tool for the right job. She took a slow breath and raised her hand. The gesture was so simple, so classroom-like in the middle of the chaos, that it cut through the noise. They all stopped and looked at her. "Instructor June," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Permission to address the crew?" In the observation booth, June leaned forward. "Granted, trainee Ji-Hyen." All eyes were on her. She turned to her crew. "The problem is one of resources," she began, her words quick and precise. "We have one team, two threats. We must assign by optimal survivability, not by preference." She pointed to the radiation leak. "Minsu, your silicate-based biology gives you the highest radiation tolerance on this crew, by a factor of 10. You take the repair team to Sector 4. Use the internal bulkheads as mobile shields. Your job is not to be immune, but to be the last one who gets sick. You have 7 minutes of safe exposure. The repair takes 5. It is the optimal match." Minsu stared at her, then at the data. He gave a single, firm nod. It made brutal, logical sense. She swiveled to Hannah. "Hannah, you stay here. Your multi-channel neural communication is the fastest on the ship. You coordinate both teams. Relay every piece of data. You are our nervous system. You do not go into the danger zone. You manage it." Hannah's antennae trembled, but she straightened up, a new purpose replacing her panic. "Understood." Finally, Ji-Hyen looked at Tae-suk, then at the hull breach schematic. "Tae-suk and I will handle Sector 9. Lyra gasped. "No, the force of the breach. The flying fragments. It is a meat grinder." "It is a physics problem," Ji-Hyen corrected gently but firmly. "The explosive decompression lasts for 93 seconds. After that, it is a static vacuum with drifting debris. The fragments are sharp, but small." She tapped her own data screen, pulling up human physiological specs. "Human bone density is 40% higher than galactic average for our mass. Our dermal layer is tougher. Our reflexive clotting factor is rapid. For the 93-second decompression window, we can anchor ourselves. After that, we patch the hole. We are, for this specific time frame and threat type, the most damage-resistant assets available." She looked around at them all. "This is not heroism. It is not a story. It is mathematics. It is biology. It is using the right tool. Minsu is the right tool for radiation. Hannah is the right tool for communication. We," she said, indicating herself and Tae-suk, "are the right tools for a violent, short-duration, physical trauma event." The logic was a cold, clean wave washing over the hot panic. It was irrefutable. It saw them not as scared individuals, but as parts of a whole, each with unique properties to be deployed. Tae-suk cracked a grin. "Well, when you put it that way, suit up." No one else objected. The plan was too clear, too rational. Minsu moved toward the equipment lockers. Hannah plugged herself into the comms array, her voice suddenly calm and clear as she began directing. Ji-Hyen and Tae-suk moved to the breach kit. As they fastened seals, Tae-suk whispered, 93 seconds, huh? 93 seconds. Ji-Hyen confirmed, her eyes hard as stone. "Then we get to work." In the observation booth, Instructor June slowly sank back into his chair. He had not seen bravery. He had seen something more profound, applied understanding. She had not raised her hand to be a hero. She had raised it to be an engineer. And in doing so, she had not just saved the simulation. She had shown them all what true harmony looked like. It was not the absence of difference. It was the precise, respectful use of it. The graduation ceremony was held in the Grand Amphitheater, the same place where the story had quietly begun. The air was still perfectly controlled, the light soft, but the feeling in the room was different. There was a new kind of respect, a silent understanding that hummed beneath the formal proceedings. The new graduates sat in rows, dressed in their formal uniforms. Hannah's carapace gleamed. Minsu sat like a mountain. Taesuk tried and failed to sit perfectly still. And Ji-hyun sat with her usual quiet posture, her hands folded in her lap. Instructor Jun stood at the center of the stage. He looked out at the faces, his gaze resting for a moment on the small human contingent. When he spoke, his voice was different. It was not the serene, lecturing tone they were used to. It was heavier, fuller with thought. For generations, he began, the Galactic Union has measured progress by peace. We have built a taxonomy of life that placed calm and stability at the very top. We believed that to evolve in gentle surroundings was to reach the highest form of being. We were not wrong to love peace, but we were wrong to think it was the only path to greatness. He paused, letting his words settle. The amphitheater was utterly silent. We mistook adaptation to tranquility for biological superiority, and we made a more serious error. We heard stories of worlds that were not gentle, worlds of challenge and relentless change, and we called those stories legends. We filed them away as myths because the reality they described was too formidable, too raw, for our comfortable philosophy to accept. He looked directly at Ji-hyun. She met his gaze, her expression calm. One trainee, Jun continued, his voice swelling with emotion, by simply being, has rewritten our textbooks. She did not come to conquer us. She did not come to boast. She came to learn. And in her quiet way, she became our teacher. He recounted no specific event. He didn't need to. Everyone knew about the garden. Everyone had heard about the medical scan, the pain demonstration. The story of the simulation had spread like starlight. She showed us that resilience is not the absence of fear, Jun said. It is the will to act with clarity despite fear. She showed us that strength is not the lack of vulnerability, but the profound ability to endure it, and to use that endurance to protect others. She showed us that cooperation is not about being the same. It is about knowing, with absolute honesty, what each unique being can do, and trusting them to do it. He raised a hand toward the graduates. You are the future diplomats, the future leaders. Look to your left. Look to your right. See not just a fellow graduate, but a being shaped by a world. Some of you are from worlds of gentle suns and soft winds. Some of you, he said, his eyes finding Ji-hyun again, are from a world that taught its children how to stand in a storm. The galaxy does not need you to be the same. It needs you to understand the strength in your differences. The ceremony continued with the awarding of diplomas. When Ji-hyun's name was called, she walked to the stage. There was no loud applause, but a deep, respectful silence followed by a wave of soft, deliberate sound, the Tarkesian equivalent of awe, the Kellery hum of high honor. Jun handed her the data crystal diploma. He gave her a bow, not as instructor to student, but as one being to another who had shown him a wider universe. She returned the bow, deeply and sincerely. After the formalities, the graduates mingled in the reception hall. The noise was happier, freer. Ji-hyun and Taesuk stood near a large viewport, looking out at the stars. Hannah and Minsu approached them. They stood together for a moment, the four of them, looking at the endless night. Hannah spoke first, her chirp softer than usual. We were wrong, Ji-hyun, about your stories, about everything. I thought your body was in a state of panic. I see now it was in a state of profound readiness. Minsu rumbled in agreement. You spoke of using the right tool. Your world made you a formidable tool, not for breaking but for building when things are broken. Ji-hyun listened, then smiled. It was a warm, true smile that reached her eyes. It made us careful, she said, and it makes us value good allies. We could never have finished the simulation alone. We needed Minsu's resistance. We needed Hannah's speed. We needed everyone. Taesuk nodded, putting a friendly hand on Minsu's solid shoulder. Exactly. So no more talk about legends, okay? We're just us. Hannah's antennae waved in a pattern that meant joyful agreement. Just us. On the viewport, a navigation image flickered to life, showing a map of the local stars. In the corner was a small, familiar blue and white marble, Earth. The four of them looked at it. It was no longer just a planet with notable geological activity in a database. To Hannah, it was a forge that created steadfast friends. To Minsu, it was an anvil that shaped unbreakable will. To June, watching from across the room, it was a lesson made flesh. To Jihyun, it was just home. A beautiful, demanding, vibrant home that had prepared her for this moment. Not to rule, but to contribute. Not to dominate, but to understand and be understood. She looked from the planet to her friends, then out to the infinite galaxy waiting for them. They were not all the same. They were better than that. They were different, and they knew what to do with it. The training was over. The real work was just beginning. And for the first time, they were all truly ready.